Chapter 2, Shoo. Eric sat at the top of the stairs. He had sniffed around for other chocolate buttons without success. He'd been tempted to try his luck in Emily's room. Her door was ajar as usual, but decided not to risk it. Besides, the prospects weren't good. Emily dropping her sweets was common. Emily leaving them was rare. Now Eric cocked his head on one side. From the room below he could hear the television. In the kitchen his dad was making supper. There was a smell of coffee and cold meat. Eric felt his mouth watering and all at once came to a decision. He would tell his mum and dad that was a thing to do. After all, it wasn't as if he'd done anything wrong. Wrong had been done to him. Eric began to go downstairs. The thought occurred to him, I wonder what's on, and then, perhaps I can stay up since I'm a dog. But going downstairs isn't easy for a dog, especially in an inexperienced one. Eric found his stomach was dragging on the steps and being tickled by the carpet. What was worse, his back legs kept catching up with his front. On the last few steps he took a tumble, skidded on the hall mat and bumped into the coat stand. After that, the sitting room door opened. The hall light went on. It was gloomy there too, and Eric's mum appeared. Mrs. Banks looked down at him. "Charles," she called, "we've got a dog in the house." A moment later, Mr. Banks appeared in the kitchen doorway. He saw a worried-looking Norfolk Terrier on the hall mat. Mr. Banks knew about dogs. He was a postman, remember? He crouched down and held out his hand. "Now then," he said, "how did you get in?" Eric peered up at his parents. He was surprised to see how enormous they were. Their feet were huge, their heads up near the ceiling, and he was surprised that they didn't know him. Of course, there was a good reason for this, but even so... Eric advanced towards his father's outstretched hand and began to speak. "I didn't get in, Dad. It's me, Eric. I've turned into a dog." Well, that's certainly what Eric meant to say. It's what was on his mind. However, what came out was just a string of barks and yelps. Eric tried again. It was no use. The trouble was, he had the brains of a boy, the thoughts of a boy, but the vocal cords of a dog. Mr. Banks patted his head. It occurred to him that he had seen this dog before. Its expression was familiar. Now Eric, in desperation, began prancing about. He had the idea of somehow miming who he was, or at least showing his parents that here was no ordinary dog. The effect was convincingly dog-like. Mrs. Banks patted him also. "It's almost like he was trying to tell us something," she said. She was a good guesser too. Unfortunately, on this occasion, not good enough. "Yes," said Mr. Banks, "perhaps he's trying to tell us how he got in." He took hold of Eric by the scruff of the neck and began leading him towards the door. "Come on, out you go." Eric didn't like the sound of this. He barked and whined. He dragged his feet. "Shh," said Mrs. Banks. "Bad dog. You'll wake the children." "I am the children," barked Eric, "or one of them, or I was." He struggled on a little longer, then sensing the hopelessness of the situation, he could hardly bite his own father, Eric gave up. He allowed himself to be led from the house and down the front path. Mrs. Banks went on ahead and opened the gate. Mr. Banks pushed him out onto the pavement. "Off you go," he said, and clapped his hands. "Shoo!" And there is a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Banks taking Eric out into the garden. Reluctantly, Eric shuffled off a few steps and then sat down. When his parents' back were turned, he pushed his head through a gap in the fence. He watched them as they returned to the house. He heard his mum say, "I wonder how he did get in." He saw the front door close. Eric rested his muzzle on the bottom rail of the fence and felt hard done by. A warm breeze ruffled the fur along his back. Garden smells assailed his nose. He pricked his ears to catch the distant chiming of an ice cream van. Someone across the road was playing a piano. Someone was laughing. Eric stared forlornly at his own front door. He began to think of ways to get back in. Just then, a young cat came sauntering round the corner out of Clay Street. The cat saw Eric, and Eric saw the cat, more or less at the same time. The cat, though inexperienced, knew what was called for. It turned and ran. Eric didn't hesitate either. Here, he was a dog, abandoned on the street by his own parents because he was a dog. What else was he to do? It wasn't his fault. He ran after the cat. And I'm going to leave it just there.